My parents banned me from my brother's wedding after I bought him a $770K house. So, while they celebrated, I quietly sold the property out from under them, setting a devastating trap they never saw coming. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. I was shivering under 3 layers of wool blankets, my chest rattling with the lingering remnants of a brutal bout of pneumonia, when the phone call that fractured my family forever finally came. For the past 8 months, I had pushed my body past its absolute breaking point. As an independent architect and custom home builder, I possessed the skills and the industry connections to do something extraordinary for my younger brother, Elijah. I had purchased a dilapidated mid-century property in a highly sought-after neighborhood and poured every ounce of my savings, my free time, and my physical health into completely gutting and renovating it. It was a $770,000 masterpiece by the time I was finished with it. I had laid the imported kitchen tile myself on weekends to save on labor costs. I had personally sanded the original hardwood floors until my hands were blistered and bleeding. I did it all because Elijah was getting married, and I wanted him and his new bride to start their lives together without the crushing weight of a mortgage, a burden that had defined my own 20s. The exhaustion had completely decimated my immune system, landing me in the hospital for 3 days on an IV drip just weeks before the wedding. Now, recovering in my small, cramped apartment, having sunk my liquid assets into their dream home, I reached for my vibrating phone on the nightstand. The caller ID read Mom. "Hi, Mom," I rasped, my throat feeling like sandpaper. I tried to inject some cheerfulness into my voice. "The doctor said I'm no longer contagious. I'll be totally fine for the rehearsal dinner on Thursday. I even got my dress tailored to account for the weight I lost." There was a long, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint, muffled sound of my father, Walker, clearing his throat in the background, and the distinct, high-pitched laugh of Ella, Elijah's fiancée. "Serenity," I asked, using her first name in my confusion. "Mom, are you there?" "Abigail, honey," she finally spoke, her voice unnaturally tight and painfully formal. It lacked any of the warmth she usually deployed when speaking to or about my brother. "Listen, your father and I, well, we've been talking with Elijah and Ella, and given your condition." "My condition is fine," I interrupted, a cold knot of dread beginning to form in my stomach. "I just told you I'm cleared." "It's not just the illness, Abigail," Serenity sighed, a sharp, irritated sound. "It's the whole aesthetic of the event. Ella has worked incredibly hard to curate a very specific, intimate vibe for the ceremony and the reception. The photographer is flying in from out of state, and they are submitting these photos to a bridal magazine. You've been so sick. You look incredibly drawn and haggard right now. It just doesn't fit the energy they are trying to project." I stopped breathing. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. "Mom, are you telling me I'm not invited to the wedding, to my own brother's wedding?" "We just think it's best if you stay home and rest," she said, her tone suddenly brisk, shifting from apologetic to defensive in a heartbeat. "It's really for the best. Ella is very stressed, and she just wants her absolute closest, most aesthetically cohesive circle there. You understand, don't you? It's their special day. We don't want any dark clouds." My mind raced, trying to process the sheer audacity of the words. I had just handed them a house, a literal, paid-off estate, and I was being cut out of the family photos because I looked haggard from building it for them. I tried to speak, but the betrayal lodged in my throat like jagged glass. The betrayal was worse than the illness itself. The immediate aftermath of that phone call was a blur of physical agony and emotional paralysis. I didn't cry. I think I was simply in too much shock to produce tears. I sat in the dim light of my living room, the wool blankets feeling heavy and suffocating. My phone remained dead silent. No follow-up texts from my father, Walker, checking to see if I was all right. No calls from Elijah. It was as if I had been neatly surgically excised from the family tree. My purpose fulfilled the moment the final coat of paint dried on their new living room walls. 2 days later, a sharp, impatient knock echoed through my apartment. I dragged myself to the door, peering through the peephole to see Elijah standing in the hallway. He looked impeccable, deeply tanned from a recent pre-wedding getaway, wearing a designer jacket I knew for a fact Ella had picked out for him. I unlocked the door, my hands trembling slightly, unsure of what to expect. An apology, a secret invitation. "Hey, Abby," he said, not meeting my eyes. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his gaze darting around my modest, slightly messy apartment with thinly veiled distaste. "Listen, I can't stay long. We have a cake tasting in 20 minutes. I just came to get the final set of spare keys for the house and the master code for the security system. Ella wants to start moving her shoe collection in before the ceremony." I stared at him. The little brother I used to carry on my hip, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, the young man whose freelance graphic design business I had financially floated for 3 years, was standing in my living room demanding the keys to the kingdom while actively barring me from the celebration. "Elijah," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "Did Mom tell you what she said to me on the phone?" He shifted his weight uncomfortably, inspecting his manicured fingernails. "Yeah, she mentioned you guys talked. Look, Abby, don't make this a whole dramatic thing. Ella is under a lot of pressure. She's an influencer, her brand relies on this wedding looking absolutely flawless. You've been sick, you look exhausted. It's just not the right look." "I look exhausted because I spent 8 months working double shifts to build you a house," I stated, stating the undeniable fact plainly, desperately hoping to see a flicker of guilt, a spark of the brother I thought I knew. Instead, Elijah just sighed, an annoyed, dramatic huff of air. He looked at me with a cold, almost pitying expression. "Abby, we appreciate the house. Really, we do. It's a great starter home for us. But the wedding, it's only for the closest family. You know, people who are really in our daily social orbit right now. Just hand over the keys and the alarm codes, please. I don't want to be late." He actually laughed, a short, dismissive chuckle as he said the words "closest family," as if my exclusion was an amusing, slightly embarrassing quirk of the seating chart rather than a profound severing of our bond. I walked over to the kitchen counter, picked up the envelope containing the spare keys and the instruction manual for the alarm, and handed them to him. I didn't say another word as he turned on his heel and walked out, closing the door firmly behind him. I stood in the silence of my apartment, the sting of his laughter echoing in my ears. They had taken everything from me, my money, my health, my dignity, and discarded me without a second thought. But as the tears finally began to fall, hot and bitter down my cheeks, a sudden, cold realization washed over me. They had taken the keys, they had planned their aesthetic photo shoot, and they had locked me out. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. To understand the depth of this betrayal, one must understand the foundation upon which Elijah and I's relationship was built. There was a 7-year age gap between us. When our parents, Walker and Serenity, faced financial ruin during a banking crisis in my late teens, I was the one who stepped up. While my father retreated into early, bitter retirement and my mother desperately tried to maintain appearances at the country club, I worked 3 jobs to put myself through architectural school. When Elijah wanted to study art, I paid his tuition. When his freelance business failed to launch, I covered his rent. He was the golden child, insulated from hardship, while I was the workhorse, expected to bear the load without complaint. I loved him fiercely, confusing my financial support with genuine emotional connection. Then, Ella arrived. Ella was a lifestyle influencer, a title that seemed to involve very little actual work and a tremendous amount of curated posing. She was 29, perfectly polished, with a wardrobe that cost more than my annual grocery budget. From the moment she entered Elijah's life, I felt a subtle but distinct shift. She didn't look at people, she assessed them. And when she assessed me, she clearly found me lacking in social capital but highly useful in financial utility. The warning signs were there, flashing in neon, but I had willfully ignored them in the name of familial peace. I remember a specific family dinner shortly after they got engaged. We were sitting at an upscale restaurant, a meal I was paying for, naturally. I was excitedly showing them the blueprints for the renovation of the property I had just purchased for them. It's going to have a beautiful open concept living space, I explained, pointing to the hand-drawn schematics. And I'm installing a custom soaking tub in the master bath. Ella hadn't even looked at the blueprints. She was swirling her wine glass, her eyes locked onto me with a predatory sharpness that completely contrasted with her usual vapid persona. "That's so sweet of you, Abigail," Ella purred, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Just out of curiosity, how does the paperwork on a gift like this work? Like, whose name is technically on the property taxes right now? Are you transferring the deed before or after the wedding? We just want to make sure our assets are protected as a married couple." My mother, Serenity, had immediately chimed in, nodding vigorously. "Yes, Abigail, we need to make sure Elijah is completely secure. You should really expedite the paperwork." I had assured them that the house was currently held under an LLC I had created specifically for the property, and that I would transfer ownership of the LLC to Elijah immediately following the wedding, once the final inspections were cleared. Ella had smiled, a thin, satisfied line, and changed the subject back to her floral arrangements. She didn't care about the custom tub or the hours I would spend building it. She only cared about the equity. She had recognized me as the family bank, and she had spent the last 2 years systematically convincing Elijah and my parents that withdrawing from that bank didn't require showing any respect or gratitude to the teller. They thought they had won. They thought they had secured their aesthetic dream wedding and their free luxury home, leaving the tired, haggard sister safely hidden away where she couldn't ruin the photographs. But sitting alone in my apartment, staring at the empty spot on the counter where the keys used to be, the grief began to calcify into something else entirely. Something sharp, cold, and relentlessly precise. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, snapping me out of my grief and into a state of hyper-focused clarity. In their arrogance, in their rush to curate the perfect aesthetic and lock me out of the photographs, they had forgotten the most fundamental rule of real estate. Possession is not ownership. I stood up, discarding the heavy wool blankets, and walked over to my home office desk. My hands were no longer shaking. I opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet and pulled out a thick, heavy, fireproof binder. Inside were the articles of incorporation and the property deeds for my business, Apex Custom Builds LLC. I flipped to the section containing the documents for the house I had just spent 8 months renovating. There it was. The deed, stamped and notarized by the county clerk. The property was owned entirely, 100%, by my LLC. I was the sole managing member and the only authorized signatory. I had drawn up the transfer paperwork weeks ago, intending to present it to Elijah and Ella at the rehearsal dinner as my grand gesture. The transfer documents sat in a separate manila envelope, completely blank, utterly unsigned. Legally, they didn't own a single square inch of that property. They had a set of spare keys I had handed over as a courtesy, assuming the impending legal transfer was a mere formality between family members. But a courtesy is not a contract. I opened my laptop, the bright screen illuminating the dark room. My background was in tech entrepreneurship before I pivoted into real estate investment, which meant I had access to enterprise-level background check software and skip tracing databases, usually reserved for corporate mergers and high-security clearances. If Ella was going to treat me like a disposable vendor, I was going to vet her like one. I typed her full legal name into the search bar, cross-referencing it with her phone number and past known addresses. I watched the progress bar load, my heart pounding a steady, rhythmic beat against my ribs. When the report finally populated on my screen, I had to physically lean closer to comprehend the sheer volume of red flags cascading down the monitor. Ella was not a successful lifestyle influencer. She was a financial illusion built on a crumbling foundation of catastrophic debt. The report detailed a staggering mountain of liabilities. There were 3 separate civil judgments against her for unpaid luxury car leases and defaulted personal loans. Her credit cards were maxed out to the tune of nearly $150,000. But the most damning piece of information was a recent, highly aggressive tax lien filed against her and her mother, Sylvia, who had apparently co-signed on a failed boutique business venture 2 years prior. They were drowning, mere months away from total, unrecoverable bankruptcy. I picked up my phone and dialed the number of my most aggressive, discreet real estate broker, an iron-willed woman named Diane who specialized in off-market, expedited sales. Abigail. Diane answered, her voice laced with surprise. "I thought you were practically on your deathbed. Are you all right?" "I'm perfectly fine, Diane," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I need a favor, a massive one. I need you to list the renovation property immediately. Pocket listing only. Cash buyers exclusively. I need a 10-day close." There was a long pause on the line. "Abby, the house you built for your brother, the one you bled into for 8 months, what happened?" "There's been a change of plans," I replied, staring at the financial ruin displaying on my monitor. "They don't want me at the wedding, so I am no longer providing the venue for their happily ever after. Find me a buyer, Diane, whatever it takes." I didn't wait for Diane to find a buyer before I made my next move. I needed to see if there was any salvageable part of my brother left beneath the manipulation. I needed to give him one final chance to wake up. The following evening, I drove to our parents' house. I knew Elijah and Ella were having dinner there. It was their weekly routine to eat my parents' food and discuss the endless, spiraling costs of the wedding. I didn't knock. I used my old key and walked straight through the front door, the heavy oak clicking shut behind me, echoing through the quiet foyer. I found them on the back patio. My father, Walker, was turning steaks on the grill, while my mother, Serenity, was carefully arranging a centerpiece of imported hydrangeas. Elijah and Ella were lounging on the patio sofa, Ella holding a crystal wine glass, laughing at something my brother had just said. The picturesque family scene shattered the moment I stepped through the sliding glass door. "Abigail," my mother gasped, dropping a stem of greenery. She looked around nervously, as if my presence alone might somehow taint the aesthetic of her backyard. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be resting." Elijah stood up, his posture immediately defensive. "Abby, we talked about this. You can't just barge in here. Ella is dealing with enough stress regarding the seating chart." "I'm not here about the seating chart, Elijah," I said, my voice cutting through the humid evening air. I walked over to the patio table and tossed a thick, aggressively bound manila folder onto the glass surface. It landed with a heavy, authoritative thud. "I brought you an early wedding gift," I continued, looking directly at my brother. "Since I won't be in attendance to give a toast, I figured I would provide you with some essential reading material for your honeymoon." Ella's eyes narrowed. She set her wine glass down, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the crystal. "What is that?" she demanded, her voice losing its artificial, melodic lilt, replaced by something sharp and fearful. "That," I said, pointing to the folder, "is a comprehensive financial background check. It details exactly who you are marrying, Elijah. It outlines the 3 active civil judgments against her. It highlights the $150,000 in unsecured credit card debt she has hidden from you. And it explains the aggressive tax lien that is currently threatening to bankrupt both her and her mother, Sylvia." The silence on the patio was deafening, broken only by the sizzling of the fat hitting the hot coals on the grill. Walker had frozen, his tongs suspended in midair. Serenity pressed a hand to her mouth. Elijah stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. He reached out a trembling hand, but before his fingers could graze the cover, Ella lunged forward and snatched it off the table, clutching it to her chest. "This is illegal." Ella shrieked, her face flushing a dark, blotchy red. The polished influencer mask dissolved instantly, revealing the desperate, cornered grifter beneath. "This is a gross violation of my privacy. She forged this, Elijah. She's jealous of me, she's always been jealous of me, and now she's fabricating documents to ruin our wedding." "Forged." I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Every single document in that file is a matter of public record, Ella. Anyone with an internet connection and a brain can find it. You are marrying him because you need a financial life raft, and you targeted me because I built the boat. That is a lie. Ella screamed, tears of rage springing to her eyes. She turned to Elijah, grabbing his arm. Baby, you have to believe me. These are old business debts. My accountant is handling them. It's an investment in my brand. She's just trying to destroy us because we wouldn't let her ruin our photos. Elijah looked at me, his eyes wide and panicked. For a fraction of a second, I saw the truth register in his gaze. He knew I didn't lie. He knew I was meticulous. But then the fear of embarrassment, the terror of calling off a wedding in front of hundreds of people, clamped down over his rationality. Get out, Elijah said, his voice shaking. Elijah, you need to read those pages, I pleaded, taking a step toward him. I said get out, Abigail. He shouted, stepping in front of Ella to shield her. You are sick. You are actually mentally unwell. You couldn't handle being excluded, so you created this insane, paranoid fantasy to sabotage my happiness. Mom, Dad, tell her to leave. My father finally moved, setting the tongs down and marching over to me. His face was stern, his eyes completely devoid of the paternal warmth I had desperately craved my entire life. You have crossed a line tonight, Abigail, Walker said coldly. This is unforgivable behavior. You will leave this house immediately, and you are formally forbidden from attending the wedding, the rehearsal, or any family events until you offer Ella a profound, written apology. I looked at my mother, hoping for a sliver of reason, but Serenity simply turned her back to me, wrapping her arms around a sobbing Ella, comforting the parasite while exiling her own daughter. Fine, I said softly, the last thread of my familial loyalty snapping cleanly in two. I'll go, but remember this conversation, Elijah. Remember that I tried to warn you. The fallout from the patio confrontation was swift and entirely predictable. My phone began blowing up the next morning with furious text messages from my brother, doubling down on his delusion. He accused me of being a toxic presence, a jealous spinster who couldn't stand to see him in love. He informed me that Ella's mother, Sylvia, was appalled by my behavior and that my actions had caused Ella to suffer a panic attack. I didn't reply to a single message. Instead, I answered a call from Diane. I found your buyer, Diane said, her voice crackling with professional adrenaline. An older couple relocating from out of state. They love the mid-century modern aesthetic, they want a turnkey property, and they are willing to pay $20,000 over your asking price to secure it immediately. All cash. No financing contingencies. When can they close? I asked, pulling up the calendar on my computer screen. The wedding was exactly 5 days away. They are incredibly motivated, Diane replied. If I push the title company, we can close and hand over the keys this Saturday afternoon. Saturday, the exact day of the wedding. Make it happen, Diane, I instructed. Set the closing time for 3 o'clock in the afternoon. 3 o'clock was the exact time Ella was scheduled to walk down the aisle. It was poetic justice in its purest form, but I needed one final piece of ammunition. The financial records were enough to prove Ella was broke, but they weren't enough to prove malicious intent. I needed irrefutable evidence that she was actively conspiring to steal the property. I expanded my background search, legally requesting the public discovery files from one of her active civil lawsuits. It took hours of sifting through mundane legal jargon, but hidden deep within an exhibit appendix of communications subpoenaed by her creditors, I found it. It was an email exchange between Ella and her mother, Sylvia, dated 3 weeks prior, right around the time they had convinced my parents to uninvite me. The text on my screen made my blood run cold. From Ella. To Sylvia. Subject, the house. Mom, stop panicking about the lien. I have it completely under control. Elijah is totally wrapped around my finger. We've officially pushed his miserable sister out of the wedding, so we don't have to deal with her depressing energy. Once the wedding is over and she signs the LLC transfer papers for the house, we instantly own an asset worth nearly $800K free and clear. My name will be on the marital deed. The second the ink is dry, we pull a massive home equity line of credit against it, pay off the judgments, and clear your name off the boutique debt. Elijah won't even notice until it's done, and by then we'll be married. Just keep smiling and play the part. It was a smoking gun. It was cold, calculated, and utterly ruthless. I printed the email, the printer humming loudly in the quiet of my office. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let my brother ruin his entire life without making one final, undeniable attempt to show him the truth, not in front of our parents, not in front of Ella, but face to face. I texted him early Wednesday morning. Meet me at the coffee shop downtown in 20 minutes. Alone. If you don't show up, I will mail this document to every single person on your guest list. He was sitting in a corner booth when I arrived, wearing a baseball cap pulled low, looking exhausted and deeply angry. The smell of roasted espresso beans and stale pastries hung in the air. "This is blackmail, Abby," he hissed as I slid into the booth across from him. "You have 5 minutes. Speak." I didn't say a word. I simply slid the printed email across the scratched wooden table. Elijah glared at me, then looked down at the paper. I watched his eyes track back and forth across the page. I watched his pupils dilate. I watched the color completely drain from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. He read it once. He read it twice. His hands began to tremble so violently that the paper rattled against the table. "Where did you get this?" he whispered, his voice cracking, the defensive anger completely evaporating, replaced by a hollow, agonizing realization. "It was submitted into public evidence during discovery for one of her debt lawsuits," I explained gently. "Elijah, she doesn't love you. She loves the deed to the property I built. Her mother, Sylvia, is in on it. They are planning to drain the equity of your home the moment you return from your honeymoon." He sat frozen for a long time, staring at the damning words in his fiancée's handwriting. The coffee machine hissed in the background. A waitress dropped a spoon. The world continued to move, but my brother was trapped in a shattered reality. Then the most tragic thing I have ever witnessed occurred. The sunk cost fallacy took root deep in his mind. He had alienated his sister, he had spent tens of thousands of dollars on deposits, he had told everyone he knew how perfect his life was. To admit he was being conned required a level of humility and courage he simply did not possess. Elijah slowly folded the paper in half, then in quarters, and slid it into his jacket pocket. He looked up at me, his eyes dead and empty. "Emails can be faked," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "Hackers do it all the time. You are trying to ruin my life because you are miserable." "Elijah," I breathed, genuinely horrified by the depth of his denial. "I am marrying her on Saturday," he stated, standing up from the booth. "Do not contact me again. Do not come near the house. Do not speak to my parents. You are dead to me, Abigail." He turned and walked out of the coffee shop, the bell above the door chiming a cheerful, mocking sound. I sat alone in the booth for a long time, staring at the empty space where my brother used to be. I had tried. I had given him every opportunity, every piece of evidence, every chance to save himself. He had chosen his own destruction. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text message to Diane. "The closing is confirmed for Saturday at 3:00 p.m. No delays." The trap was fully set. The execution date was locked, and there was absolutely nothing they could do to stop it. Saturday arrived with a bright, mocking sunshine that felt entirely inappropriate for the gravity of what was about to transpire. While my family was likely rushing through hair and makeup appointments, adjusting floral lapels, and preparing for a deeply fraudulent celebration of love, I was sitting in the sterile, air-conditioned conference room of a downtown title company. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each sound marking another second closer to the absolute dismantling of Ella's grand illusion. Across the heavy oak table sat the new buyers, a sweet, older couple who were practically buzzing with excitement over their new mid-century modern home. My broker, Diane, sat next to me, sliding a seemingly endless stack of documents across the table. At exactly 2:45 p.m., 15 minutes before my brother was scheduled to stand at the altar and pledge his life to a woman who viewed him as a human debit card, I picked up the heavy black pen provided by the escrow officer. I didn't hesitate. I didn't tremble. My internal monologue, which had been a chaotic storm of grief and rage for the past 2 weeks, was now completely silent. There was only the singular, driving need for justice. I signed my name on the final line, transferring the deed from my LLC directly to the new buyers. A few minutes later, Diane's phone buzzed. She looked down, smiled a sharp, predatory smile, and nodded at me. "The wire transfer just cleared," Diane announced to the room. "The funds are officially in your account, Abigail. The house is sold." I handed the velvet box containing the keys to the new owners, wishing them years of happiness in a home that I had built with my own 2 hands. Then, I drove directly to the property. I knew their schedule. Ella had meticulously planned a grand after-party arrival at the house for the entire wedding party before heading to their honeymoon suite. They were supposed to pull up to the pristine, empty house, pop champagne on the freshly landscaped lawn, and take their first photos as property owners. I parked my car down the street, obscured by a large oak tree, and waited. At 5:30 p.m., a massive white stretch limousine turned the corner and slowly glided down the quiet suburban street. It was followed by 2 luxury SUVs carrying my parents and Ella's mother, Sylvia. But the driveway wasn't empty. 2 large, aggressively branded moving trucks were parked haphazardly on the pristine concrete. The new owners had wasted absolutely no time. A crew of burly men in matching t-shirts was actively carrying large pieces of furniture through the custom front door I had hung myself. I stepped out of my car and walked calmly down the sidewalk, approaching the property just as the doors of the limousine opened. Elijah stepped out first, looking incredibly handsome in his tailored tuxedo, holding a bottle of expensive champagne. He turned to help Ella out of the car. She emerged in a massive, glittering explosion of white tulle and lace, a professional photographer instantly hovering around her, snapping photos of her candid joy. Then, Ella looked up. She saw the moving trucks. The bright, artificial smile froze on her face, melting into a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. "What is this?" Ella demanded, her voice shrill, completely ruining the aesthetic moment. She turned to Elijah. "Who are these people? Why are there trucks in our driveway?" My parents, Walker and Serenity, stepped out of their SUV, looking equally bewildered. Sylvia, wearing a deeply ostentatious mother-of-the-bride dress, hurried over, her face pinched with anxiety. I walked onto the edge of the lawn, folding my arms across my chest. "They are the new owners, Ella," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the rumble of the moving trucks. The entire wedding party whipped their heads around to look at me. The photographer slowly lowered his camera. "Abigail." My mother gasped, stepping forward. "What are you talking about? What are you doing here? You are supposed to be at home." "I don't own this house anymore, Mom," I said, locking eyes with my brother. "And neither does Elijah. I sold it. The closing finished exactly 2 hours and 45 minutes ago. The cash is in my corporate account, and the deed is in their name." You sold it." Elijah stammered, the champagne bottle hanging limply in his hand. The color was rapidly draining from his face as the memory of the email in the coffee shop surely rushed back to the forefront of his mind. "You can't do that." Ella shrieked, launching herself forward. The tulle of her dress caught on a rose bush, tearing audibly, but she didn't care. The polished influencer was gone, the desperate fraud was entirely exposed. "That was our wedding gift. That was our house. We have a verbal agreement. I will sue you. I will take you to court and take every penny you have." "You can't afford a lawyer, Ella," I replied calmly, my voice steady and unwavering. I didn't raise my tone. I didn't need to. The truth was loud enough. "And even if you could, you have no legal standing. It was owned by my LLC. You were simply a guest who had her invitation revoked." Then the catalyst ignited. Sylvia, who had been standing in stunned silence, suddenly let out a horrified, guttural gasp. She pushed past Walker and grabbed Ella's arm with bruising force. "What does she mean, she sold it?" Sylvia hissed, her voice panicked and shrill, completely forgetting the audience of family and groomsmen standing around them. "Ella, you looked me in the eye this morning and promised me the equity was guaranteed today. You said we were pulling the credit line tomorrow to pay off the tax lien. If there's no house, how am I supposed to pay the judgment? I am going to lose everything. The silence that fell over the lawn was absolute. The moving men paused on the porch. The groomsmen shifted uncomfortably. My parents stood frozen like statues, the horrifying reality of the situation finally penetrating their willful ignorance. Ella tried to shush her mother, her eyes darting frantically toward Elijah. "Mom, shut up, not now." But it was too late. The irrefutable proof had just been broadcast by her own co-conspirator. Elijah stared at Sylvia, then looked at Ella. The deep, agonizing betrayal that had been meant for me was now crashing down upon him. He realized that every word of the background check, every syllable of the intercepted email, had been the absolute truth. He had alienated his only sister and married a woman who was actively plotting to harvest his family's generosity to pay off her own fraudulent debts. "You." Elijah whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of heartbreak and rising fury. He looked at Ella as if he were seeing a stranger. "You were going to take out a loan against the house the second we got back. You used me." "Baby, no, she's confused." Ella pleaded, reaching out for him with desperate, grasping hands. Elijah stepped back, pulling his arm away from her touch as if she were radioactive. He looked down at his left hand. Slowly, deliberately, he reached over and pulled the shiny new gold wedding band off his finger. "We are getting an annulment," Elijah said, his voice ringing with newfound clarity and devastating finality. He didn't yell. He simply stated a fact. He dropped the ring onto the pristine concrete driveway. It landed with a sharp, hollow ping that echoed louder than any shout. Without looking back at his sobbing bride or her panicked mother, Elijah turned and walked down the sidewalk, away from the house, away from the limousine, and away from the illusion. The immediate aftermath on the lawn was a portrait of complete and utter devastation for the antagonist. Ella sank to her knees right there on the concrete, the heavy fabric of her expensive, unpaid-for gown pooling around her as she sobbed hysterically. Sylvia was pacing back and forth, screaming into her cell phone, likely trying to reach the accountant she had been dodging for months. My parents, Walker and Serenity, looked like they had aged 10 years in the span of 5 minutes. My father looked at me, his mouth opening and closing as he searched for words that simply didn't exist. My mother took a tentative step toward me, tears streaming down her face. "Abigail, honey, we didn't know," Serenity sobbed, reaching out a trembling hand. "We had no idea she was. We are so sorry." "I gave you the file, Mom," I said gently but firmly, stepping back to maintain my physical boundary. "I gave you both the proof, and you chose the aesthetic over the truth. You chose to kick me out when I was sick because I didn't look good enough for her pictures. I forgive you because you are my parents, but things are going to be very different from now on. I need space." I turned and walked back to my car, leaving them to deal with the messy, public wreckage of the monster they had enabled. I started the engine, pulling away from the curb. As I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw the new owners kindly, but firmly asking Ella and Sylvia to vacate their property line. I rolled down my window, letting the warm evening breeze wash over me, feeling an overwhelming, profound sense of peace. The heavy burden of being the unappreciated family workhorse had finally been lifted from my shoulders. The following weeks played out exactly as one might expect when a house of cards collapses in a hurricane. Elijah moved immediately to annul the marriage, citing fraud, a process made significantly easier by the undeniable public spectacle on the lawn and the paper trail of her debt. With the loss of her impending real estate windfall, Ella's financial reality caught up to her with brutal speed. Her creditors moved forward with the judgments. The lifestyle influencer was forced to file for total, unrecoverable bankruptcy, her curated social media accounts going dark as her luxury leased vehicles were repossessed one by one. As for my brother, it took time. The shame and humiliation of his choices weighed heavily on him. He didn't contact me for nearly a month. I used that time to focus entirely on my own well-being, taking the incredible profit from the off-market sale and investing it into a new, massive commercial project that would secure my financial independence for the rest of my life. I started eating well, sleeping soundly, and prioritizing my own happiness above the demands of my family. Then, on a rainy Tuesday evening, there was a quiet, hesitant knock on my apartment door. I opened it to find Elijah standing in the hallway. He looked thinner, stripped of the designer clothes Ella had forced upon him, wearing a simple sweater and jeans. He looked like the little brother I used to know. He was holding a small, white box from my favorite bakery. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. I stepped aside, letting him enter. He stood awkwardly in the living room, looking around the space he had so callously dismissed just weeks prior. "Abby," he started, his voice cracking. He looked down at his shoes, unable to meet my eyes. "There are no words, I know that. I was arrogant, I was blind, and I was so incredibly cruel to you. You tried to save me, you built me a literal house, and I threw you away because I was too weak to admit I was being played. I am so sorry. I will spend the rest of my life trying to make this up to you." I looked at him, seeing the genuine remorse etched into every line of his face. The golden child had finally faced the harsh consequences of reality, and it had humbled him completely. "Put the pastries on the counter, Elijah," I said softly, a small, genuine smile touching my lips for the first time in months. "I'll make some coffee. We have a lot to talk about." The healing process wouldn't be instantaneous. Trust, once broken so deeply, requires careful, methodical rebuilding. But as we sat at my small kitchen table, sharing a pastry and talking honestly for the first time in years, I knew that the toxic cycle had been broken. I had protected myself, I had forced the truth into the light, and I had ensured that justice was fully and undeniably served. The foundation was finally clear, and for the first time in my life, I was building something strictly for myself,